My name is Eleanor Vance, and for most of my 34 years, I believed that a quiet life was a safe life. I was an editor at a small, respectable publishing house in Crestfall, a city that hummed with the constant, low-grade anxiety of ambition. I found solace in the precise, ordered world of words, in the gentle rhythm of manuscripts arriving and departing. My life, I thought, was like a well-structured novel, a stable beginning, a predictable middle, and the promise of a peaceful end. I had married Michael for that same sense of stability. He was a financial advisor, a man who spoke in terms of portfolios and projections, whose world was governed by the reassuring logic of numbers. He was handsome in a muted, understated way, and his calm demeanor felt like an anchor in the swirling chaos of my own self-doubt. We weren't a love story for the ages, but we were, I told myself, a sensible partnership. Then, two things happened that unraveled the careful tapestry of my life. First, a letter arrived from a lawyer in coastal Oregon. My great-aunt Isabel, a woman I remembered only in sepia-toned photographs and whispered family stories, had passed away, leaving me her entire estate, a modest but significant inheritance and a small, forgotten property in a town called Havenwood. The second event came a month later, a sudden, terrifying schism in my own body. A mild stroke, the doctors called it, but it felt like a thief in the night. It stole the strength from my left side, tangled the words on my tongue, and left me feeling like a stranger in my own skin. It was during my slow, frustrating recovery that Michael's quiet stability began to feel like something else entirely. It was then that the story I thought I was living revealed itself to be a lie. I will never forget the chill of that morning. The kind that seeps under your skin and stays there even when the sun is shining. Michael's sedan slowed to a stop on the edge of a gravel driveway, its tires crunching over weeds that had long since claimed the path. He stepped out, adjusted his crisp collar, and for a moment just stood there, hands on his hips, staring at the house like it was a problem he was about to solve. "This is it," he said, his voice carefully neutral, avoiding my eyes. The house belonged to my great-aunt Isabel, a place I hadn't seen since I was a child. The porch sagged in the middle like a weary sigh, paint peeled from the clapboard and pale, curling strips and a thick mane of ivy climbed one side as if trying to pull the whole structure back into the earth. This, according to Michael and his mother, Brenda, was where I was supposed to heal. A place where, in Brenda's saccharine tone, Eleanor can finally rest. It will be so peaceful for her when her time comes. When her time comes. As if I were a flickering candle, already guttering in the wax. I sat in the passenger seat, my hands clenched in my lap, my left leg a dull, unresponsive weight. My body hadn't fully recovered, and walking was a slow, deliberate effort. But I could walk. I could think. I could feel. Yet they had woven a narrative of my fragility, convincing themselves, and trying to convince me, that I was better off here, tucked away. Michael came around and opened my door, his expression a practiced blend of pity and impatience. "You'll be comfortable here, Elle. The air is so much cleaner than the city. It'll be good for your heart." Good for my heart. My heart was fracturing right there in the driveway, the quiet, steady beat I'd taken for granted now a frantic, painful thrumming. My gaze drifted to the person leaning against the porch railing. A woman in her late 50s, with a weary slump to her shoulders and a t-shirt stained with what looked like coffee. Her hair was a tangle of gray and brown, her eyes distant. She gave a little wave that was more of a twitch, then lit a cigarette, the smoke curling up into the clean air Michael had just praised. "That's Ruth," he said, his voice low. "She'll be your caretaker. She lives just down the road. I'll send her a check every month." Out of my inheritance money, I thought, the words a bitter taste in my mouth. He retrieved the walker from the trunk and set it on the gravel. "Come on, Eleanor. Let's get you settled." Settled. Like a dusty piece of furniture being moved into long-term storage. I sat there frozen. My fingers gripped the door frame, my pulse a frantic drum against my ribs. Every cell in my body screamed that this was a betrayal, a quiet, polite banishment. But what was I to do? My body still betrayed me with tremors when I stood for too long. My voice still cracked when I tried to muster the force of an argument. For 12 years, I had trusted him, and now that trust was the very cage he was locking me inside. Sensing my hesitation, Michael sighed, then bent down, scooping me into his arms as if I weighed nothing. The gesture wasn't tender, it was efficient. My face burned, not with the flush of embarrassment, but with a white-hot rage I couldn't articulate. Ruth stubbed out her cigarette on the porch rail and pushed the front door open, the sound of its creak echoing in the silence. "Spare rooms at the back," she mumbled, disappearing inside. Michael carried me across the porch and into the house. The air was thick with the scent of dust, decaying wood, and the faint, melancholic smell of rain-soaked earth. The walls were bare, marked only by the faint outlines where pictures must have hung for decades. "I'll check in every couple of weeks," Michael said, placing my suitcases by the door. "Ruth will handle the day-to-day. You won't have to worry about a thing." A thing. As if I were incapable of thought, incapable of feeling, incapable of wanting more than to simply exist until I didn't. When he finally stepped back outside, I pushed myself to the window. He stood by his car, tapping at his phone, a small, tight smile on his face. Then he glanced at the house one last time. His expression wasn't guilty. It was relieved. He gave a short, awkward wave, climbed into the polished silence of his car, and drove away without looking back. I stayed by that window long after the sound of the engine had faded into the whisper of the wind through the pines. My fingers gripped the dusty sill, my knuckles white. For the first time in months, something sharp and clean cut through the fog of my illness and grief. It was anger, bright and vital. And beneath that anger, something else stirred, something I hadn't felt since before I'd met Michael, before I'd learned to make myself small. It felt like strength. I used to believe I had chosen the safe man. The one who wouldn't break my heart, who wouldn't gamble away our savings or vanish into the ether of a midlife crisis. When we first met, Michael was gentle, attentive, the kind of man who remembered I liked my tea with honey and opened doors without making a show of it. I was 22, a junior editor drunk on the romance of literature, dreaming of discovering the next great voice. He was a junior financial advisor, steady, reliable, ordinary. It was, I thought, what I needed. Our wedding was a small, tasteful affair in Brenda's manicured garden, all white roses and polite applause. She had hugged me tightly, her voice thick with emotion as she called me the daughter she never had. I believed her. I believed everything back then. The first few years were placid. Michael would bring home takeout on nights I was buried in a manuscript and rub the tension from my shoulders as I hunched over my laptop. Brenda, however, was a master of the subtle critique. She would purse her lips whenever I mentioned a late night at the office, making comments like, "You don't want to burn yourself out, dear. A woman's health is so delicate." She believed in a world of her own making, home-cooked meals at 6 sharp, Sunday lunches after church, and her son always just a phone call away. When I was promoted to senior editor and excitedly told them the news over one of those Sunday lunches, Brenda's smile became a brittle, painted-on thing. Later that night, as we were getting ready for bed, Michael said, "Maybe you should consider scaling back a bit. Mom's just worried about you putting too much pressure on yourself." I laughed it off, but a small, cold stone settled in my stomach. Years passed. My ambitions didn't vanish, but they quieted, shrinking to fit the space allotted to them. His life, meanwhile, remained a bastion of predictability. Then the letter about Great-Aunt Isabel's will arrived. I sat at our sleek kitchen island, the crisp parchment trembling in my hand. "Michael, what's wrong?" he asked, dropping his keys into the ceramic bowl by the door. I've inherited something," I whispered, my voice barely audible. When he read the letter, his eyes lit up with an intensity one hadn't seen in years. He pulled me into a hug, so tight it felt possessive, not celebratory. For a fleeting moment, I let myself hope. Maybe this will change things. Maybe we can finally build the life we once talked about. Brenda brought over champagne that weekend, her hugs warmer, her praise more effusive. I was her lucky girl. In the weeks that followed, their attitudes underwent a seismic shift. Brenda stopped her gentle prodding about my work hours. Michael started coming home earlier, bringing flowers, suggesting candlelit dinners. I wanted so desperately to believe it was a rekindling, but a persistent, dissonant note played beneath the symphony of their affection. The first time I saw the truth, it didn't even register. I'd gone shopping for a birthday gift for him, a handsome leather-bound journal. As I stepped out of the bookstore, I saw him across the street, sitting at a sidewalk cafe. He was laughing, his hand resting on the arm of a young woman with sleek, dark hair. When she leaned in and kissed him on the lips, a quick, familiar gesture, my world didn't shatter. It simply cracked. A hairline fracture down the center of everything I thought was real. I didn't confront him. Not then. Instead, I did something the old Eleanor would never have done. I started paying attention. I checked our credit card statements and found charges for a hotel I'd never been to, for a jeweler in a part of town we never visited. I looked at his phone one night while he slept and saw the messages. Her name was Chloe. They weren't just messages, they were blueprints for a future. Once Elle's money clears, I can finally start my own consultancy firm. We'll be set, Chloe, I promise. She won't need it for long anyway, not with her health. The doctors say she needs to avoid stress. He was already planning my obsolescence. That was the night I called Clara, my college roommate and the one person whose friendship had survived the gravitational pull of my marriage. She listened without interruption as I poured out the whole sordid story, the affair, the inheritance, the chilling way Brenda now looked at me, as if I were a temporary inconvenience. When I finally fell silent, my voice raw, Clara's was firm. Eleanor, you have to think about what you do next. You can't stay with a man who is actively planning your erasure. I wanted to scream, to shatter a plate against the wall, to collapse into a heap on the kitchen floor. Instead, I sat in the dark, the glow of his phone illuminating the cold, hard facts of my life. A month later, the stroke happened. I was at my desk, reading a submission, when the words on the page began to swim and the left side of my world went numb. I woke up in a sterile white room with Michael holding my hand and Brenda hovering nearby, her face a mask of concerned sorrow. "You're going to be okay," Michael whispered, brushing a stray hair from my forehead. "We'll take care of you. Take care of you." Those words echoed in my mind for weeks. In the beginning, I mistook them for love. But as my recovery stalled, or rather, as I allowed them to believe it had stalled, I began to see the truth. He stayed later and later at the office. Brenda took over my schedule, doling out my medication, bringing me bland, tasteless meals she insisted were good for me. They would whisper in the hallway when they thought I was asleep, words like power of attorney and quiet place and long-term care. Then, one morning, Michael came to me with his brilliant idea. A fresh start at my great-aunt's house in Havenwood, a place where I could heal in peace. Heal? No, that wasn't the word he meant. He was preparing me to disappear. The day he drove me out there, I didn't cry. I had already shed all my tears in the silent, lonely nights. But sitting in that car, watching him carry my bags into a house meant to be my final, quiet chapter, I made a silent vow. You may have written me off, Michael, but I am the editor of this story now. And I am far from finished. When Michael's car vanished down the gravel road, an immense silence settled over the property. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. I stood in the center of the dusty living room, the walker he'd left for me standing sentinel by the door, a prop in a play I refused to act in. The house was colder inside than out, a hollow space where memories lingered like ghosts. I could smell the sweet decay of old wood and the sour tang of neglect. This was it. This was the place they imagined I would slowly fade, a footnote in my own life story. Ruth shuffled out from the back of the house, a dish rag in her hand. "Bedroom's clean enough," she said, her voice flat. "Bathroom's down the hall. I'll be back tomorrow to check on you." Her eyes slid past me, as if I were already part of the scenery. I wanted to yell at her. To tell her I wasn't an invalid, that I wasn't dying, that I didn't need her or anyone else to check on me. But the words were lodged in my throat, a tight knot of anger and a grief so profound it felt like a physical weight. She pulled on a thin jacket and left, the screen door banging shut behind her, the sound startlingly loud in the stillness. I was alone. I stood perfectly still for a long time, my hands clenched at my sides. They trembled, not from the lingering weakness of the stroke, but from a surge of pure, unadulterated fury. A laugh, low and bitter, escaped my lips. It was all so absurdly tragic. My husband, my mother-in-law, this dispassionate caretaker. They no longer saw Eleanor. They saw a liability, an inheritance to be managed, a problem to be neatly filed away. In that moment, I decided I was done being their problem. I took a slow, deliberate step, my left leg protesting with a dull ache. Then another. I walked, unsteadily at first, to the center of the room, my heart pounding with the effort, my breath coming in short, sharp gasps. The truth was, I had been recovering far better than I'd let on. The physical therapy had worked. The weakness had receded. I could walk short distances without aid, but I had hidden this progress from Michael and Brenda. I needed to see the full measure of their intentions. I needed to know what they would do if they thought I was completely helpless. And they had shown me. They had abandoned me. I laughed again, this time louder. The sound was unfamiliar, fierce. It echoed in the empty house, and in it, I heard the voice of the woman I used to be. I pulled out my phone and dialed the one number I knew I could trust. Clara answered on the second ring. Eleanor? Where are you? I've been calling and texting for 2 days. Michael said you were. Oh God, are you okay? I'm fine, I said, and for the first time, it felt true. He left me, Clara. At my great-aunt's house. He said it would be good for my heart. Clara let out a string of curses that made me smile. I'm on my way, she said, her voice a steel blade. Don't you dare lift anything heavier than a book, you hear me? When the call ended, I looked around at the peeling wallpaper and the grimy windows. For the first time in a year, I didn't feel helpless. I felt a flicker of something wild and dangerous, hope. I spent the next few hours exploring my inheritance. The kitchen was a time capsule of the 1970s, but the old porcelain sink was deep and sturdy. The bedroom had a lumpy mattress, but the window looked out onto a meadow of wildflowers. The porch groaned, but it held my weight. Everything was worn, but nothing was completely broken. It was all salvageable. By the time Clara's headlights swept across the front of the house, I had a list scribbled on the back of an old envelope: new locks, patch roof, scour bathroom, burn mattress. She burst through the door, her face a storm of fury and concern. They just left you here? Alone? With that woman? Ruth? She's a delight, I said dryly. Clara didn't smile. She just looked at me, her eyes taking in the fact that I was standing in the middle of the room, no walker in sight. You're standing. I'm standing, I confirmed. A slow, fierce smile spread across her face. All right then. What's the plan? The plan. Until that moment, I hadn't thought beyond surviving the day. But now, looking at my friend, at this broken but beautiful house, I could see the faint outline of a future. I'm not going back, I said, my voice steady. Not to him. Not to that life. This is my house now, Clara. This is my life. And I'm going to rebuild it. She nodded, pulling a small toolkit from her oversized bag. Then, let's start with the locks. The next time Michael shows up, he can use the damn knocker. We worked for hours, our laughter mingling with our muttered curses about Michael and Brenda. We scrubbed floors, aired out dusty linens, and managed to get the power working in most of the rooms. When we finally collapsed onto the ancient, floral-patterned sofa, covered in sweat and grime, Clara handed me a bottle of water. You know this isn't just about the house, right, Elle? I nodded, gripping the bottle tightly. I know. It's about everything they tried to take from me. It's about what I'm taking back. Outside, the wind had shifted, carrying the clean, sweet scent of pine and damp earth. I closed my eyes and breathed it in, deep into my lungs. For the first time in what felt like a lifetime, I could breathe freely. That night, I slept on that lumpy, sagging mattress as if it were the most luxurious bed in the world. It was mine. My choice. My house. My life. And tomorrow I would begin. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the grimy windows, illuminating motes of dust dancing in the air like tiny, golden sprites. I woke up with an ache in muscles I'd forgotten I had, but it was a good ache, the ache of effort, of life returning to dormant limbs. For once, The pain was a sign that I had done something for myself. Clara had left a note taped to a kitchen cabinet before heading back to the city for work. "You are stronger than you know. Call me when it's time to raid the hardware store." I smiled, folding the note carefully and tucking it into my pocket like a talisman. I stepped out onto the porch, the cool, damp wood a shock against my bare feet. I looked out at the land, truly looked at it for the first time. The property was wild, overgrown with Queen Anne's lace and tangled blackberry bushes, but it was beautiful. A small creek, which I guessed was Willow Creek, gurgled softly at the edge of the woods. For years, I had rushed through my days, a blur of deadlines and obligations. Standing there in the quiet morning, I felt a sense of boundless possibility. The first weeks were a blur of hard, physical labor. I learned that scraping decades of grime off kitchen tiles is a form of meditation. I hauled broken furniture into the yard, creating a pyre of my past life. I watched online tutorials and, with Clara's help on weekends, learned to patch a leaky roof and replace a broken window pane. My hands, once soft from turning pages, became calloused and capable. One afternoon, as I was wrestling with a rusted, ancient pushmower, a dusty blue pickup truck pulled into the drive. A man with broad shoulders and a kind, weathered face stepped out. His eyes, the color of a summer sky, held a gentle amusement. "Planning on taming all that with that little thing?" he asked, nodding at my pathetic mower. "It's a work in progress," I shot back, wiping a bead of sweat from my brow. He chuckled, a low, warm sound. "I'm Elias Harris. I own the farm next door." He disappeared back to his truck and returned with a formidable-looking weed trimmer. "Let me give you a hand. Consider it a welcome to the neighborhood." I started to protest, but he was already pulling the starter cord, and the machine roared to life. Within an hour, the jungle of my front yard was a manageable lawn. When he finally cut the engine, he wiped his brow and said, "Place has good bones. Just needs some love." It wasn't just Elias. Word seemed to travel on the wind in Havenwood. Mrs. Gable from the general store showed up one day with a warm apple pie and a stack of paint swatches. A retired librarian named Ms. Albright offered to help me sort through the boxes of old books I'd found in the attic, her eyes lighting up at the sight of the forgotten treasures. At first, I was suspicious, waiting for the other shoe to drop, for the bill to be presented. But it never was. They offered their help, their time, and their kindness freely, asking for nothing in return. They were rebuilding my faith in humanity, one small gesture at a time. Elias became a regular presence. Sometimes he'd arrive with a toolbox to fix the creaking porch steps or help me rig a new clothesline. Other times, he'd just appear with 2 glasses of iced tea and sit with me on the porch, talking about the rhythm of his farm, the changing seasons, the quiet satisfaction of a hard day's work. He told me, one quiet evening, that he had lost his wife to cancer 3 years prior, and that working the land was what had kept him from breaking. "I know what it's like," he said, his voice soft, "to feel like your world has been cut out from under you." I didn't have to explain my own story. He just seemed to understand. I reached out and rested my hand on his for a brief moment, a silent acknowledgement of shared loss and survival. We sat in comfortable silence, listening to the crickets begin their evening song. With the house slowly becoming a home, I turned my attention to the land. I started a small garden, my first attempts clumsy and uncertain. Elias showed me how to build raised beds, how to test the soil, how to coax life from the earth. There was something profoundly healing about plunging my hands into the rich, dark soil, about tending to the fragile green shoots that pushed their way toward the sun. One Saturday, Havenwood held its weekly farmers market. Elias convinced me to bring a small basket of my surplus tomatoes and zucchini. I felt shy, almost foolish, setting up my meager display. But by noon, everything was gone. Mrs. Gable bought 3 of my largest tomatoes, declaring them the best she'd had all summer. That night, as I counted the small handful of crumpled bills, I realized it wasn't about the money. It was about creating something of value with my own 2 hands. It was about being a part of a community again, a participant rather than a spectator. The nightmares about Michael still came sometimes, jolting me awake in the dark, my heart pounding with a familiar dread. But now I had an anchor. I had the solid feel of the earth under my feet, the scent of lavender and rosemary from my herb garden, and the quiet, steady friendship of a man who saw me not as broken, but as resilient. Slowly, gently, something else began to bloom alongside my herbs and flowers. I found myself looking forward to the sound of Elias's truck rumbling up the drive, to the easy way he'd lean against the doorframe with that slow smile, to the comfortable silence we could share. He never pushed, never pried. He was just there, as reliable as the sunrise. By the end of the summer, the house no longer felt like a place of exile. It felt like a sanctuary. The walls were painted a warm, creamy white, the roof was sound, and the scent of dust had been replaced by the fragrance of baking bread and fresh-cut flowers. I had blisters on my hands and a permanent ache in my back, but every ache was a testament to the fact that I was not just rebuilding a house, but a life. It was Elias who planted the seed that would change everything. One evening, as we watched the fireflies begin their nightly ballet, he leaned back in his chair and said, "You ever think about doing more with this place, Eleanor? It's good land. You have a gift for it." "More? Like what?" I asked, intrigued. He shrugged. "Your herbs and flowers are amazing. People at the market are already asking for you. You could start a proper business. An apothecary, maybe. Sell dried herbs, tinctures, floral arrangements. People around here, they love that sort of thing. Honest. Local." I laughed at first. Me? A business owner? I was just a woman trying to learn how to stand on her own 2 feet again. But later that night, the idea took root. I had the inheritance, the money Michael had been so eager to control. What if I invested it not in stocks or bonds, but in myself? The next morning, I drove into town and filed the paperwork to register a business, Willow Creek Apothecary. It felt like the most defiant, most hopeful thing I had ever done. I spent the autumn expanding the gardens, building a small, rustic greenhouse from reclaimed windows, and drying bundles of lavender, chamomile, and mint from the rafters in the kitchen. My hands smelled perpetually of earth and herbs, my clothes of sun and sweat. And I had never felt more alive. As the business grew, so did my quiet bond with Elias. It wasn't a whirlwind romance. It was something deeper, quieter, built on a foundation of shared work and mutual respect. It was in the way he'd leave a basket of fresh eggs on my porch in the morning, and the way I'd save him the corner piece of the peach cobbler I'd baked. One evening, after we'd spent the day building shelves for my new workshop, he stayed for dinner. We sat on the porch as the sky bled into shades of violet and rose. "You've changed, Eleanor," he said softly, looking at me. "When you first came here, you were so fragile. Now, you're the strongest person I know." "I had to be," I said, my voice thick with emotion. He reached across the small table and took my hand. His was rough and calloused, mine was smudged with dirt. It felt like the most natural thing in the world. It felt simple and true and safe. From then on, he was more than a neighbor, more than a friend. He was my partner, in work and in life, a quiet but constant presence. By the time the first anniversary of my arrival in Havenwood approached, Willow Creek Apothecary was a modest success. I had regular customers, a small but growing online presence, and I'd even hired a local teenager part-time to help with packaging orders. Handing her that first paycheck, knowing I was helping her save for college, brought tears to my eyes. I wasn't a burden anymore. I was an employer. That night, sitting on the porch with Elias, I thought about the woman I had been a year ago, frightened, broken, and abandoned. And I thought about the woman I was now, independent, capable, and happy. Happy. It was a word I hadn't dared to use for so long. I glanced at Elias, who was watching the sunset, a contented look on his face. He caught me looking and smiled, a slow, warm, patient smile that made my heart ache in the best possible way. The tightness in my chest wasn't fear this time. It was hope. And for the first time, I let myself believe it. Maybe love wasn't gone forever. Maybe it just needed to find me when I was finally ready to receive it. It was almost a year to the day since Michael had left me at the house when his sedan rolled up the gravel drive again. I was kneeling in one of the new herb beds, my hands deep in the fragrant soil, when I heard the familiar, quiet crunch of his tires. For a split second, my heart seized, a muscle memory of the fear I used to feel whenever he came home in a dark mood. But then I took a deep breath, stood up, wiped the dirt from my jeans, and waited. He stepped out of the car, wearing a tailored suit that looked ridiculously out of place against the backdrop of my wild, thriving garden. "Eleanor," he said, his voice smooth as polished stone. "You look, well." His eyes scanned the greenhouse, the freshly painted porch, the neat rows of my apothecary garden. "You've been busy." I didn't smile. "What do you want, Michael?" He gestured vaguely at the house, the land. "We need to talk. About the inheritance. About a fair division of assets." I laughed. It wasn't a bitter sound, but one of genuine, astonished disbelief. "A division? You mean the inheritance you tried to steal after you cheated on me? The money you were counting on after you left me here, hoping I would quietly fade away?" He flinched, a barely perceptible tightening around his eyes, but he masked it quickly with an air of condescending reason. "Come on, Elle. I made mistakes. But we were married. Legally, I'm entitled to a portion. You're entitled to nothing." The voice, low and steady, came from behind me. Elias had emerged from the workshop, wiping his hands on a rag. His presence was a solid, grounding force at my back. "You abandoned her, Michael. When she was sick and needed you. That doesn't entitle you to a damn thing." Michael's jaw tightened. "And who are you? Her new handyman? Congratulations. I hope you're enjoying the charity case." Elias took a step forward, his calm demeanor hardening, but I put a hand on his arm. "Stop," I said. My voice was quiet, but it carried across the yard. "You don't get to talk to him like that. And you don't get to call me that anymore. You don't get to call me anything." He tried to step closer, lowering his voice into the conspiratorial tone he used to use to manipulate me. "Look, I know things got messy, but you can't seriously." "I don't think anything about you anymore, Michael," I said, the words coming out clean and sharp. "You left me here because it was easier than loving me through something hard. You lied, you cheated, and you planned a new life on the assumption that mine was ending. I don't hate you for it. I don't even have the energy for that. But you are not a part of this life. And you will not touch a single dollar of what I have built here." For a long moment, there was only the sound of the wind rustling the leaves of the old oak tree. Michael's mouth opened, then closed. He looked from my calm face to Elias's steady one, and for the first time, he seemed to see me not as his weak, pliant wife, but as a stranger. "You heard her," Elias said softly. "Time to go." Defeated, Michael turned without another word and climbed back into his car. The engine purred to life, and dust kicked up as he reversed and drove away, shrinking in the distance until he was gone. Just like the last time. Only this time, I wasn't the one being left behind. I was the one standing my ground. I exhaled slowly, a breath I felt I'd been holding for a year. I realized my hands were shaking, not with fear, but with the sheer force of my own emancipation. Elias touched my shoulder gently. "Are you okay?" I nodded, turning to look at him, at the house, at the thriving gardens all around us. "Better than okay," I said, a genuine smile finally reaching my eyes. "I'm free." He smiled back, a quiet, knowing smile that understood everything those words meant. "Come on," he said softly. "Let's get these lavender seedlings in the ground before the sun sets." That evening, we worked side by side, our hands in the same soil, our quiet conversation punctuated by the chirping of crickets. When we finished, we sat on the porch steps, watching the sky turn from gold to dusky lavender. Without a word, Elias reached over and threaded his fingers through mine. I didn't pull away. It wasn't a moment of fireworks or grand passion. It was something deeper, more patient. It was something rooted, like the life I was now living. A month later, Willow Creek Apothecary hosted its first open garden day. The whole town, it seemed, turned out. Families wandered through the rows of herbs, children laughed as they chased butterflies, and a local musician played his guitar under the shade of the old oak. I stood near the entrance, greeting my neighbors, my friends. Clara was there, beaming, and she pulled me into a fierce hug. "Look at you," she whispered in my ear. "Look at what you built." I looked around at the joyful chaos, at the sunlight glinting off the greenhouse panes, at Elias by the lemonade stand, who caught my eye and gave me a smile that was just for me. For the first time, I felt completely and utterly whole. Not because I had gotten revenge or proven someone wrong, but because I had chosen myself. I had chosen healing over bitterness, roots over running, and a quiet, steady love over a hollow, safe-looking lie. As the afternoon light softened, I walked to the edge of my property, to the bank of the little creek that gave my business its name. I breathed in the scent of damp earth and blooming flowers, and whispered to the quiet, listening air, "This is home. This is my life. And it is so, so beautiful."